What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to get into my wide receiver rankings for week 8 of the fantasy football season. This will be our second straight week doing this where I go through my rankings and my tiers. So let me know how you guys are feeling about this type of video. Now, we're going to go over our top 24 wide receivers, which tier they fall into, and then I'm going to highlight 5 wide receivers that I consider my starts of the week. Now, we're going to do things a little bit differently next week, where we're going to do 2 of these kinds of videos with the rankings. We're going to do all of our normal stuff, and then I'm going to incorporate some rest of season, some dynasty stuff, crank up our videos from seven days a week to, I think we're trying to get 8 or 9. Want to give you guys some more dynasty, some more rest of season content to prepare you guys that play dynasty and to prepare you guys that are trying to go out here and win championships. Now, with that being said, we produce daily fantasy football content on this channel, so make sure you stick around, subscribe. When I say subscribe, I don't just mean maybe subscribe. Go down there, subscribe. It helps the boy out. Become a part of a dope community. My Discord's down there. My Patreon's down there. Anybody that has been following along for a while now can tell you this is one of the dopest places to be in the fantasy football space. Now, with all that being said, let's not waste any more time. That's not what we're about on this channel. Let's get to the steak and potatoes of this video. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm critical. My nitty bag.
All right, so we got the tier list out. I'm going to be back here on the 1s and 2s. We do not have an editor for this video, so I'm going to be out here doing this live, drag and dropping, pulling up graphics. But, you know, you might be able to call me a modern day Renaissance man with the skills that I have back here on the 1s and 2s. Now I'm honestly just joking around. I just have to drag players from down here and bring them up, so it's really not a big deal. But our wide receiver 1, which is pretty crazy, but he has now forced my hand. I keep on disrespecting this guy, and you know, I want to keep him at, you know, like wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 3, and you know, have him in that top 5 but not give him that full respect that he really deserves. But Cooper Kupp has forced my hand. He is the wide receiver 1 for this week. The matchup doesn't matter. He's going to be in Houston, but he is the wide receiver 1 in fantasy by a large margin. He is at 27.2 PPR points per game. The wide receiver 2 right now is Tyra Kill with 21.5 at wide receiver 2. That is a 6-point gap. Cooper Kupp is out here putting up about as many fantasy points. I think he's like 0.4 less on a point game basis than Derrick Henry, the RB1. What he's doing is insane. He is on pace right now for 136 catches, 1,965 yards, and 22 touchdowns. Now, obviously, I think that's going to slow down, but I'm done trying to get out ahead of it. We're just going to ride Cooper Kupp until the wheels fall off and respect him as such, which then brings us to our wide receiver 2. Still in the S tier is Tyra Kill at home against the New York Giants. I think, you know, this is a tough game to gauge for me. We talked about this yesterday. This feels like a really good get-right spot for the Chiefs, but they're so unpredictable. I really don't know what to think about it. I think that this is the logical part of me thinks that this is, you know, okay, this is Patrick Mahomes, a great quarterback. I think that they probably bounced back and killed the Giants. They're going to be at home in Arrowhead. I don't know. Regardless, Tyra Kill has been the wide receiver 2 in PPR points per game. He's been the wide receiver 2 in PPR. I want to say Debo Samuel is the wide receiver 2 in points per game. I think Tyra Kill is like the wide receiver 3. He's the wide receiver 2 despite this offense kind of struggling recently. And what I will say is that even if they do struggle against the Giants, I doubt that they struggle putting up points. There's probably going to be turnovers. It could be ugly. Maybe they don't cover the spread. But I highly, highly doubt that they hold them to, you know, the under 10 points like the Titans did last week. And I think that they come out here, and at the very least, I don't know if they're going to win because obviously we don't know what's going on with the Chiefs, but I think they're going to come out here and be, you know, firing on all cylinders and scoring a lot of points. At wide receiver 3, we have Stephon Diggs at home against the Miami Dolphins, and this is a great matchup. The Dolphins are giving up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but the Bills are wearing the helmets with the red buffaloes on the side. Those are the helmets where they go crazy in. Now, obviously, that's not anything substantive. I don't know if I said that right, but I don't know. That's not anything concrete or real. I'm kind of just joking around with that. But Miami Dolphins are giving up the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, so they're going to go crazy. He is the wide receiver 7 right now in expected points per game, but is the wide receiver 19. So he's been unlucky. He's on the bad part of that pendulum that swings back and forth in this game. And I think that the boom games on the other side of that, you know, on the other side of the expected points equation are coming in Stephon Diggs' favor. Just hope that Emmanuel Sanders doesn't, kind of vulture him at the goal line or, steal touchdowns away. I think the Stephon Diggs is in store for a big game one of these weeks. What better week than against the Miami Dolphins? And our last wide receiver in this top tier, this upper echelon of wide receivers is Justin Jefferson. We know he's extremely talented, and I'm targeting this game. We talked about this in yesterday's video with the running backs, but this is the highest over-under of the slate. It was at 54.5 yesterday. It is moving up. It's now at over-under 55. So it's supposed to be a really high-scoring game. The Cowboys-Vikings Sunday Night Football. It's going to be a really good game. A nice refresher after, just the absolute shit show that we had to watch. Just all of the games last week were terrible. I didn't mind the Colts-Niners game on primetime, but most of the games were pretty bad. And the Cowboys, even though they have Trevon Diggs, who's been great, he's kind of plays this like ball hawk type role. They haven't been shut down against opposing wide receivers. They're still allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. I'm not really scared of Trevon Diggs when it comes to Justin Jefferson. I don't know if you guys saw the quote, but I think Justin Jefferson was like, I'm a ball hawk too. Justin Jefferson's got that dog in him, so I'm not really afraid that he's going to back down from Trevon Diggs, which then brings us to our next tier, A tier, Debo Samuel, our first start of the week here. And he's the wide receiver 2 in points per game. Like I said, Tyra Kill is actually number 3. And he's wide receiver 2 in points per game behind only Cooper Kupp. He's been insane. And I really like this matchup against the Chicago Bears. Even though the over-under is kind of low, I think Debo probably abuses these corners. This right here, down there, shows PFF's like matchup advantage to opposing wide receivers. You have DeAndre Hopkins, you have Cooper Kupp, and then you have Debo Samuel. Debo Samuel is one of the only 3 guys to have an excellent advantage. He is going to probably use and abuse these Bears corners. Now, it did come out that he came up with a calf injury. I do believe that he missed practice on Wednesday, but I want to say he practiced today on Thursday, so he should be fine for Sunday. And then on top of that, the Bears are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. I think that Debo is getting all the looks. Jimmy Garoppolo stares him down the entire play. Debo is in a spot now where you kind of have to respect him as a top 8 wide receiver rest of season. Kind of hitting that year 3 breakout kind of reminds me of, Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, a little bit less because those guys he's a wide receiver 2 in points per game. So honestly, pretty close to what those guys did. Calvin Ridley last year and then Godwin the year before that, which then brings us to another start of the week, AJ Brown. Now these guys are at the higher end of things, so they're kind of gimmies, but I just really like their matchups. I think that I'm a little bit higher than consensus on them. Now, obviously, you are starting these guys, but I just want to highlight that I really like their matchups this week, or else I'd be, just giving my starts of the week with the fringier guys. But with AJ Brown, he's so back. He's so back. He looked so good last week, and the volume has been there. He finished as the wide receiver 4 last week, and he is one of 6 wide receivers to register a 20% target share or better in every healthy game he's been in this season. And I wanted to highlight AJ Brown because the Colts are quietly a pass funnel that I don't think that people really have caught on to yet. We all know the Buccaneers are a pass funnel, the Saints are a pass funnel, but the Colts have the number 1 rush defense DVOA. I don't know if I'm saying that right. The rush defense DVOA, and they have the 22nd pass. They're 22nd in pass defense DVOA. So they're a much better rush defense than they are a pass defense, and they're giving up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So they kind of shut you down in terms of the run. Now, obviously, I'm not saying they're going to shut down Derrick Henry, but they open things up and let you pass on them a little bit. Their corners aren't anything special. Their safeties aren't anything special. So I really like A.J. Brown. I think he's finally starting to get back in his groove. And I think this is where we see A.J. Brown start to go on a little bit of a tear here this season. Then we have our wide receiver 7, DJ Moore in Atlanta. Nothing too crazy in terms of this matchup. DJ Moore, he might even be a little bit too high on this list because he hasn't had a top 12 finish in the last 3 weeks. But I will say the last 3 weeks, Darnold has been insanely bad. He's been insanely bad. He was really good in the first 4 games, and he was insanely bad the last 3. I do think that we're going to find the middle ground with Sam Darnold here. The targets have been there for DJ Moore. And then on top of that, this is a game that could get weird. This is an NFC South game. A lot of these games become shootouts in years past. They're going to be in the dome or in a dome in Atlanta. I think things could get weird. I think that DJ Moore probably has a get-right game this week, which brings us to wide receiver 8, Jamar Chase, which might even be a little bit low, given the fact that Jamar Chase is essentially goated. The guy is insane. He's out. He is Randy Moss. I saw a really good comparison. I want to say it was from Scott H on Twitter. I can't remember what the handle was. But he said that Jamar Chase is kind of like, now this is a wild comparison, but he's kind of like a mix between Tyra Kill and AJ Brown in terms of his yak ability, big play ability, being just hyper efficient all the time. It's not a terrible comparison, to be honest with you. Like Tyra Kill and AJ Brown, which is crazy to say, but he is kind of somewhere in between the two. Now, the problem for me is that the Jets are in a great matchup because they are a run funnel, because they are so bad. My favorite team, they get swamped. There's going to be Joe Flacco out there, maybe Mike White. Who knows who's going to start? But even though in rush defense and pass defense, DVOA, they're pretty bad in both, they're allowing the most fantasy points to opposing running backs and the second least fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So because teams get out ahead so early, they just rely on the running game, and then everything just kind of falls into place from there. So you kind of just have to hope that Jamar Chase is going to win on efficiency, which he has, and he needs to get his before this game gets out of reach, because this could be a game where they salt it away with a mix of Mixon, Samaje Perine, and some Chris Evans. So you just need him to kind of produce before things get too ugly in that game, which then brings us to Deandre Hopkins, who's going to be playing tonight. Now, obviously, these videos come out on Friday, so we're not going to spend too much time talking about Deandre Hopkins because he's going to be Thursday. But as long as he is playing, I know that he's been on the injury report. As long as he's playing, he should be just fine. And from that graphic earlier, he has the best matchup against his opposing corners this week with Jair Alexander still not on the field, which then brings us to Calvin Ridley at wide receiver 10. And he doesn't have a beautiful matchup against Carolina, right? So he's going to be at home against Carolina. We talked about this with DJ Moore, but Calvin Ridley's usage has been fine. I think that he's literally top 3 in expected points per game. He's just been unlucky. He's not top 3 in expected points per game. I believe he's the wide receiver 7 in expected points per game. He would be an elite wide receiver. All right, I wrote down wide receiver 7, but I remember when I checked it, he was like wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. But the expected points are there. The volume is there. He has seen a 20% target share or more in every single game. I believe that he is on this graphic as well. Yeah, he's up there as well. He's seen a 20% target share or more. He has seen 10 or more targets in every game after week 1. The points are coming. If Matt Ryan's actually looked pretty good. I think that Matt Ryan's actually not as washed as I thought he was in like the first 2 weeks. But I think that Calvin Ridley is due for a bounce back. I think that the yards will come if Matt Ryan can find a way to get a rookie tight end against all odds, guys that usually don't produce 100-yard games, and I think he can get a wide receiver that he has like 3 years of rapport with, 4 years of rapport with the ball, and get him fantasy relevant. Then at wide receiver 11, we have Terry McLaurin, and he just went for 7 catches, 122, and a touchdown last week. Even though a touchdown like bounced right off his helmet, he could have had an even bigger game. Now, he doesn't have a great matchup against Denver. It's pretty much a meh matchup, not going to be a high-scoring game, kind of ugly. But he's been 6th in target share. He's had these crazy boom weeks. So you just kind of have to ride Terry McLaurin as a fringe, wide receiver 1. Which then brings us to C tier. And our third start of the week is CeeDee Lamb. And I've talked about this matchup these last 2 days, and it's probably going to be my luck where the over-under set at 55, and then the total is it's going to be like a 20-17 game, like it was with the Chargers versus the Cowboys. But I'm going to trust Vegas. I'm going to trust that the total will hover around 55, and if it does, I love all these pass catchers in this matchup, especially CeeDee Lamb, because I think there's a good chance that the problem with the Cowboys has been with CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper has been that they beat up on teams, and then their defense hasn't been as bad as we thought they would be. Their defense has actually been pretty good with Trevon Diggs, and Micah Parsons has looked good, and all those guys have really stepped up to the point where their defense isn't such a band of brothers to the point where they are behind in every game like they were last year. So it gets you in an area where they can actually sustain a lead. They're not going to blow it because their defense just keeps on allowing points. So they can actually run on their lead, give the ball to Ezekiel Elliott, and just kind of chew out the clock, where we've seen games where Dak Prescott only throws for under 25 pass attempts. But I think in this game, the Vikings have a good enough defense with Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and kind of how they've been scoring this season. I think that they have enough firepower to keep up with the Cowboys, which means that the Cowboys can't just sit back and just churn out the run and chew out the clock, which means that they're going to be playing in a competitive game like they did against the Patriots. And in that Patriots game where they played a close one, I think it went to overtime, CeeDee Lamb saw 11 targets in that game. He had 9 catches, went absolutely crazy. And the Vikings have nobody at cornerback. Patrick Peterson is hurt, who's been getting exposed all year. And then the 3 names that they have as their starting corners are Cameron Dantzler, Bashad Breeland, and Mackenzie Alexander. So no one of consequence in that defensive backfield, I guess is what I would call it, which then brings us to our fourth start of the week, Chris Godwin. And I love him in this matchup against New Orleans because, some people might think, why don't you have Mike Evans as your number one, as the number one Buccaneers wide receiver because of what he's been doing. But with Chris Godwin, I think that he kind of benefits from this matchup because we know the Saints are a pass funnel. So there's going to be a lot of pass attempts. There's going to be a lot of fantasy points to be had through the air. But Mike Evans has historically struggled against Marcus Lattimore. Marcus Lattimore is going to be shadowing him this week. And this is kind of what it looks like since 2017. In games versus Saints, he hasn't done much. Since he had 7 fantasy points in 2020. In the games in 2020, he had 7 fantasy points, 10, 7, 0. So that red one doesn't count. 0, 13, 28, 11, 2. So since Lattimore has entered the league, Mike Evans has had problems against the Saints, which I think that he is going to get shadowed on the outside by Marshawn Lattimore, and on the inside in the slot, I think that Godwin is going to get free against whoever they put on him in that spot. I don't know if that's going to be like Gardner Johnson, whoever they have in the slot, but I think that Godwin has the more favorable matchup this week. The Saints are giving up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, so I think with Godwin having the lighter matchup, I like Godwin as a fringe wide receiver 1 in this matchup. Another guy kind of in this range is Mike Williams, who I think we're kind of forgetting about because he had the bye week. Then before that, he had that knee injury. But remember, he had that bye week, which essentially gives him, that Sunday, that next Sunday, and then that Sunday. So that's like pretty much 2 weeks to tend to his knee injury. He had like I think it was like his knee was swelling or he had fluid in his knee. Whatever the problem was, I think he had enough time to get that figured out. It's not an insane matchup against the Patriots. They're only 5-point favorites at home. But I like Mike Williams to kind of get right here. I think the Chargers are probably going to come out of the bye scoring, firing on all cylinders, and Mike Williams, is going to be back to that, he was like a fringe top 5 guy through the first 5 weeks. So I like him to kind of bounce back into that range. At wide receiver 15, we have Deontay Johnson, who's going to be in Cleveland. And that's not a pretty matchup, or at least on the surface, it's not a pretty matchup, but the Browns are actually giving up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, which obviously isn't like the most concrete stat because that takes a lot of other things into account, like game script and volume. But regardless, he's the wide receiver 11 on the season. He's 7th in target share. The volume is always there for Deontay Johnson, so I like him. Obviously in PPR formats, he's going to get a lot of targets, a lot of catches. With Juju gone, I really like Deontay Johnson. I think that if Deontay Johnson has a blow-up game here, I think you can make a case to have him as a top 12 wide receiver rest of season. Then we have the other part of Chris Godwin with Mike Evans at wide receiver 16. Now, obviously, we talked earlier, he's going to be shadowed by Marcus Lattimore. I think that'll hinder him a little bit, but I don't think it's a death sentence. It's just why I prefer Chris Godwin over Mike Evans in this matchup. I still think that Mike Evans is a decent play here at wide receiver 16 as a, fringy wide receiver, or not even fringy, but like a mid-range wide receiver 2. Then the last wide receiver of this tier is going to be Keenan Allen. Like I said with Mike Williams, this matchup at home against the Patriots, it's not a beautiful matchup, but the volume and production have been in there. I think Justin Herbert's going to come out of this bye looking extremely good. So they haven't really given us a reason to not play Keenan Allen or Mike Williams as upper tier wide receiver 2s. Then we have D tier starting with Amari Cooper. And like I said with Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, we want the wide receivers in this game now. Just make sure that you monitor Michael Gallup's status. I don't think that Michael Gallup playing would move Amari that far back because I think that Michael Gallup probably gets eased back into the lineup, right? He's not going to have a full slate of targets, of snaps. But it's just something to look at in terms of Amari Cooper's outlook. I still think that he's going to be fine. I still think that Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb are fine plays this week. Then we have DK Metcalf, who has been a really tough evaluation for me with Russell Wilson gone because I have such a hard time ranking Metcalf rest of season, weekly rankings, with Geno Smith just being so bad. Geno Smith threw 12 completions, 22 attempts, 167 yards, and a touchdown last week. Now, the Jaguars are a good matchup. I think that Metcalf can kill these corners. I think that if Russell Wilson was there, DK Metcalf would be a top 5 play this week. I just have such a hard time trusting a guy like Geno Smith. It's just a lot of, kind of the Joe Flacco, kind of the, I wouldn't even call it like Teddy, like almost like the Josh Rosen experience where you're getting like 50% completion percentage and the throws aren't even downfield. It's just ugly. Again, DK Metcalf is super talented. He can take anything to the house. We saw that last week, but I think it's going to catch up with him where he gets like 3 catches for 40 yards, and it's not going to be a great fantasy day for him. Then we have the last wide receiver in this tier, Adam Thielen. Again, we want players in this matchup: Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson. Adam Thielen has been the wide receiver 13 on the season and he's going up against the 6th worst team in stopping fantasy wide receivers, and he should probably be higher than this, to be honest with you, but we're going to keep him in D tier towards the back end of, the wide receiver 2s, which brings us to E tier, last tier of the day. And I like Chase Claypool. I think that I'm considerably higher than the market on Chase Claypool. He played in pretty much all of the 2 wide receiver sets with Juju Smith-Schuster gone, which is huge because now he's going to be out there as a full-time player, and he's torched this Cleveland secondary in the past. They're not that good, right? So Denzel Ward's a pretty good corner, but last year he finished top 15 against them twice. Claypool has torched the secondary in the past. I think that we're due for a Claypool, blow-up game here very soon. And then we have Devonta Smith. This E tier honestly might as well be all of my guys because you have to really make your calls from wide receiver like 21 to like 28. You kind of have to make your calls on who you are higher than consensus on. And the next one's Devonta Smith. I know some guys have him like around like wide receiver 30, but Devonta Smith is actually my last start of the week. For a guy that wasn't that high on Devonta Smith coming out, I actually have really liked his usage this year. He's 5th in air yard share, and he's coming off a week where he just had 32% of his team's targets. And I think that this is a really good game script for him because the Eagles are going to be in Detroit, only a 3.5-point favorite, so it's going to be a close game. And Detroit has been the 6th worst pass DVOA defense, and I think that they keep it close enough so that the Eagles throw the ball, it stays competitive, and like I said, the 6th worst pass DVOA defense. So Devonta Smith is going to go out there, he's going to cook those corners. Eventually, these air yards and these target share and these targets will convert into fantasy points. So I like Devonta Smith as a fringe wide receiver 2 this week. Then at wide receiver 23, we have Robert Woods. And I just think that him and Cooper Kupp are going to give the Houston Texans a lot of problems in terms of like their secondary. He's been a top 25 wide receiver in PPR leagues the last 3 weeks. He's been a top 24 wide receiver, top 25 wide receiver 2 of the last 3 weeks. Robert Woods has looked great. He's looked fantastic. It hasn't looked fantastic, actually. It hasn't been pretty for Robert Woods. But I think that they're going to score enough points. I think that eventually he is going to get kind of his squeaky wheel game. He has been pretty much good to either get, 6 for like 60 or like a touchdown. He is just the quintessential. He has a high floor. He's a fine wide receiver 2. That's really all I can say about him. Then we have Tee Higgins. And I have a tough time with Tee Higgins because I actually love him and I want to keep on moving him up because the Bengals have shown that they're passing a lot more. Through the first, I want to say 4 to 5 weeks of the season, through the first 6 weeks of the season, I put this out in a tweet, I think 2 days ago. They were like bottom 5 to 10 in pass rate in neutral game scripts, right? So they were really leaning on the run for whatever reason, maybe trying to get Joe Burrow back from health. But last week in a game where they dominated the Ravens in neutral game scripts, so not when they were dominating, not in downs where they needed to pass the ball, but just in neutral spots of the game, they passed the ball at the 6th highest rate last week. So they are getting to a spot now where they're getting more aggressive. They're starting to pass more like Zach Taylor did in 2020, where he just absolutely blew the doors off and passed the ball no matter what the score was. So I like Tee Higgins for that. But like I said earlier, it's going to be tough because it's not going to be a neutral game setting. This is the Jets. They're going to kill the Jets. I think they're like double-digit favorites at this point. And you essentially just need to hope that, like I said, the Jets are a run funnel defense. They're bad against both, but teams beat up on them so bad that they get out ahead by too much, and they end up, just running the ball, chewing out the clock. So with Tee Higgins, like with Jamar Chase, you kind of just have to hope that he gets there before things get ugly. Tee Higgins did see like a 40% plus target share last week. He out-targeted Jamar Chase, even though Jamar Chase was the one with the big game. So I think that Tee Higgins' big game is coming up soon. He could just absolutely disrespect this Jets secondary. Now, with that being said, that is going to do it for our Week 8 wide receiver rankings. Let me know how you guys feel about those tiers. Let me know how you guys feel about this video format. We're kind of going away from my start sit series where we would do my 5 favorite plays, my 5 sits for the week. This way, we kind of just go over the top 24, my top 60 wide receivers, my top 50 running backs, 30 quarterbacks, 20 tight ends, all of those, and even in 0.5 PPR, standard PPR, I have them all laid out, even the flexes, right? So between running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, super flex rankings as well, across the board for literally $5, my weekly rankings all on the Patreon. Patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I update those every single week. I'm actually going to make those final adjustments after I'm done recording this video. Now, I touched on it earlier, but I think that next week, let me know how you guys feel about this schedule. I think Monday, we're going to do top 10 takeaways. Then I think Tuesday, we're going to do our top running back waiver wire ads and our top wide receiver ads, or like pass catcher ads, and that'll just have like wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. Then, so that's 3 videos. Then on Wednesday, we'll do our trade targets. Then Thursday, we'll go running back rankings. And I think that on Thursday, again, we'll do wide receiver rankings. Then Friday, we'll do a dynasty video. And then Saturday, we'll do a rest of season video. And then Sunday, we'll do a live stream. So that's 9 videos. I kind of figured out in my head how I could get that done. So let me know if that sounds good. Let me know. I think that would be a banger schedule for the rest of the season. And then obviously, once the trade deadline's passed, we'll kind of go, we'll take out the trade target video. Maybe we'll either do 2 dynasty, 2 rest of season, something like that. Now, with that being said, I love you guys. I'm going to get going on these rankings. I know a lot of the patrons out there are depending on me to get these done. So with that being said, actually, I got this new little outro. You guys ready? I don't have a music. I got to put music on it, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Thirsty, trying to choose. I got the juice. I got the juice. That I'm on. In my head is kind of glad I'm on.